I begin this meeting by acknowledging the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we meet. I also acknowledge our gratitude that we share these lands today, our sorrow for the costs of that sharing, and our hope that we can move in unity to an Australia that is fair and just for all its Indigenous peoples. And as usual, we start the meeting with the YCW prayer, which is really a workers' prayer, and a prayer which is meaningful, very meaningful for a number of us. Lord Jesus, a worker like me, help me and all my fellow workers to think like you, to work with you, to pray through you, to live in you, to give you all my strength and all my time. May your kingdom come in all our factories, farms, workshops and offices, and in all our homes. Be everywhere better known, better loved, better served. Deliver us forever from injustice and hatred, from evil and sin. May our souls remain in your grace today, and may the soul of every worker who died on Labor's battlefield rest in peace. Amen. Thank you. As Stefan indicated, we're very privileged to have a guest speaker tonight, Sarah Prenger from Germany, who Sarah is the former president of the International YCW. Stefan will formally introduce Sarah, but I would just like to say to you, Sarah, before that happens, welcome, and we're looking forward very much to hearing from you. Over to you, Stefan.
Thanks very much, Brian. Yes, we are indeed privileged to have Sarah with us tonight. Sarah has just recently concluded her term as International President of the International YCW. She, as Brian mentioned, was originally from Germany and has now returned to Germany, to Essen, which has been the headquarters of the German YCW since the 1940s. And currently she's completing a Master's in Catholic Social Teaching. She's also been very heavily involved with what we used to call in my time, the Group of 8, but which is now expanded to about 10 or 11, which are the specialised Catholic action movements that were started on the model of the YCW, so including the YCS, including the Christian Worker Movement and many other movements which we don't actually know in Australia. So Sarah's going to share some of all that wide experience that she's had under the title of the YCW's Missionary Dimension. Thanks very much, Sarah.
Thanks, Stefan, and thanks everyone. I'm actually, I'm very glad to be with all of you tonight. And thanks for welcoming me so warmly, but I'm also curious to listen to all of your experiences, which I think I can learn a lot of. So yeah, Stefan, when he approached me, he asked me to share a little bit of my experiences. And then when we exchanged emails a little bit in the process, we noticed maybe it could be interesting to also talk about the missionary dimension of YCW. So I'm trying to do both. And Stefan asked me to talk around 20 minutes. So that's what I'm gonna do. And whenever you don't feel comfortable with my German accent or with my speaking too fast or whatever, please just raise your hand and I will try to repeat. I don't think that I'm gonna sound like an Australian, but maybe you can understand me. Is that fine with everyone or any note? Yeah, thank you. So yeah, actually I joined YCW when I was barely 17.
Could you increase the volume a little bit, please?
Ah, yeah. Thanks for telling me. Better? 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 Yeah? Great.
I think so, yeah.
So as I mentioned, I would start telling a little bit about my experience. And I would like to share a little bit about my background before entering the IS. So yeah, I joined the movement when I was barely 17. And that was because there was an activity in a former concentration camp of the Nazis. So in the area where I was living, there used to be some ground, but there was nothing in this ground. just people knew that the Nazis, they used to have a concentration camp there, like not one of these camps which are supposed to persecute people like Auschwitz, but one of these camps where people are killed just by work. And those who were in prison there, it was basically it was many communists, but also political prisoners and many workers' prisoners also. So YCW had the idea to grab for traces there with the help of an ecologist in order to build a memorial site. And that activity was public. They invited many people, and I was just interested and participated in that activity. And that's how I actually met the movement. And then you know how it is. No, people are going to tell you that you have to come to the next meeting. And yeah, that's how I ended up in that. We actually had a very lovely base group. I still remember these times, and I really loved it. We were like, 16, 17, 18, and discussing many issues which were relevant for us. And one of the key questions we had, it was about the sense of life. Why do we exist? What shall we do? What is it? And then there's all this rebellion against parents, against school, but all was about around this question about the sense of life. So being in that base group, we also organized activities, and I took responsibility by organizing 2 activities, which were like the starting point. One was one formation session about women's rights, which I did with 2 other girls. And then actually we organized one activity really about that question, which I just mentioned, the sense of life. And we had been looking at different philosophical answers and how we all see that, and discussed about that question. And it was around after 1 year that I had been in that base group that I was asked to become a regional leader responsible for that base group, to make a little bit the connection between the diocesan level and this base group, which is what I did. And being active there for some years, doing stuff which I think you all know, which YCW does. And I kind of interrupted that after I finished high school, because I went to Czech Republic and I worked with young Roma people. And there was this huge poverty of this group of people still in Central Europe nowadays. But it was also really striking how big the discrimination was. Like when I was talking to Czech people, sometimes when I was just in the street or in a shop and people asked me, you're German, what are you doing? And I was saying, I'm working with Roma people, I'm doing voluntary service. Like one time, a woman, she made a crucifix, like, because she was so shocked that someone young would be working with these people. Yeah, so I was actually really shocked by that, and I wondered if that is a reality in Czech Republic, how is it in Germany, which is like the neighboring country. So that was actually one of the questions I brought with me coming back. And there was one national action group in YCW Germany, which had just finished one campaign and was looking for another action. So I came with that question and discussed with them if we want to find out. So that was actually our approach to look in different cities, to look for young Roma people and to ask them, how is your reality? How do you see that? And we actually ended up with organizing that action for several years, producing a booklet about the reality and also a movie. And some of the Roma people we met also became leaders of YCW, members and leaders of YCW. And it was also during that time that I was all involved in that action that YCW Germany looked for some delegate to participate in the World Council in India, 2008. And I was one of the candidates and was elected to go to that council, and that's how I got involved in all that European international stuff. Because connected to that World Council, we also talked about the necessity to coordinate ourselves on European level, because we didn't have a European coordinator at the time. And it was actually one result of that World Council that Bridget Rauch from Australia, whom I think many of you knew, she used to be General Secretary of YCW before. She was really open to step from being International General Secretary to European coordinator, and yeah, she played that role for around 2 years after from 2008 to 2010, and that was really, I think it was really helpful for Europe, also for Germany, and yeah, and one of the things that really helped us in Germany, it was the confrontation actually with the other movements, and really this thinking that Bridget and others brought about the necessity to really do actions based on the CJET Act. And yeah, I would really say that it was really helpful, and actually also the formation that were given to the delegates of the World Council and to other people involved there, it helped us to, I mean, I first implemented it in the action we were doing with young Roma people, but it helped us to really slowly also bring it in the movement. And yeah, I became president of YCW Germany, first volunteer, and in that period we also discussed about, you would say, precarious work, this reality of all of us working, but working short term, having weekly contracts or 3-month contracts or 6-month contracts. And that I had the impression when we also talked with adults, it was really one reality which had changed, because talking with parents or with MTC, with the adult movement, it used to be like, okay, either you're unemployed or you have a job, and then okay, there are these precarious people, but that's a minority. But this reality that we felt that everyone, it was quite normal to have like limited contracts, that we really found that was special. And yeah, we carried out a campaign on the precarious work in YCW Germany, using this formation that we had gotten also from Bridget and others about the CJET Act. And yeah, that was a huge campaign, and it was quite successful, I would say. Yeah. And yeah, with all these experiences a little bit more, there suddenly approached this World Council, which actually was in Germany in 2016. And yeah, people were looking for president, and some people also proposed me and approached me. And so, yeah, I think that's how I ended up in that international secretariat. And I think you know that the International Secretariat is actually composed of 3 people. There's not only the president, there's also the international treasurer. And that was when I started, Andy Predicala from Philippines. And because he had started before, he also finished after 4 years. And the new person who was elected is Lizelle Salem, also from Philippines. You might know her. She's actually also still the international treasurer now. And there's the general secretary. And he was elected together with me, and together with me, it's Orlando Machado from Venezuela. So the 3 of us, we were the international secretariat. And if you ask me about my experience working in the IS, I would actually say that there's 2 phases. One phase is before COVID, and one phase is with COVID, and that was totally different. Maybe there's one thing that's in common, and that is that in both phases, even the IS would be in Brussels. You would think the residence was also in Brussels, but still I was not so much in Brussels. So yeah, before COVID, the key element of my mandate was traveling. It's about visiting national movements, of course. It's also about participating in continental activities, and it's also about representation work in Geneva and Rome. Also Paris, as Stefan mentioned, the MIAC, the different movements. We often met in Paris, but yeah, there's the Vatican in Rome, and there's the ILO in Geneva. which are some elements. And then, I was a lot in Latin America because it was a continent I was following up, participating in continental activities and visiting national movements. And of course, we were talking about and discussing and acting about realities. Some of them were also mentioned in our IPA: precarious work, youth unemployment, informal work, gender inequality, migration. And we had seen that there were some elements which were actually new, but still quite important, and we had to do some investigation about them. And one of them was the digitalization of work and the changing of jobs, but also the ecology and the link actually between the ecological dimension and the reality of young workers. Because that was even before Laudato Si, we saw that there's actually a connection. And the International Council gave us a mandate to investigate a little bit on that. So that was basically through all the time of our work. But one key moment was that we organized one seminary in Indonesia in 2018, where we discussed all that questions. And actually the report is still also on the homepage. So if you're interested, we can send it to you. And we saw that this was quite important. But then, as I was mentioning, then there came COVID. And that was a huge change, of course, on the one hand, in the work of the IS, because, of course, out of a sudden, the traveling was not possible anymore. And there was a very short break when we all were thinking, okay, we're just not having these activities now, but we're going to have them in autumn. No, I think that was also in other fields, and maybe for all of you, that this short break. But very, very, very soon, everyone noticed that this was not a thing about, only for some weeks. And we all started to work remotely and online. So that's what we did. And actually, all these formation sessions, which we had done before physically, we started to do webinars. And all these meetings, also Stefan mentioned the MIAX meetings, but also even the ILC, the International Labour Council, it was done remotely. So everything went to remotely. And it was actually also characteristic of, I think, the work in the IS, but also of many workers, that you would do really different things, but still sit all the time at the same place. Like even when we started there and I said, wow, you have been here 15 minutes ago. Someone asked, but where is where? Yeah, well, in the digital sphere. Yeah. And of course, one of the key questions was, since it changed so much for us, what does it change for the young workers? So we actually started one investigation about that, asking all the national movements, what was the impact of the pandemic on your members and on the young workers? Of course, having also the objectives that they would start talking about their reality. And and we actually published one analysis. I also sent it to Stefan before, and I would just like to share my screen in order for you to see it. We have this analysis, and by the time being, thanks to Stefan also for sharing the link. So if anyone wants to download it later, you can do that. But what we actually saw, it was not totally different from the realities that we had seen before, but it had worsened. No, and some of the elements was that, of course, young workers were losing their income, especially informal workers who had been on the street and doing things and now had to choose between going out, earning money but risking your life, or staying at home but having no income. And then there were so many jobs which were lost. And that was actually also, the other consequence was, of course, that the youth unemployment and in general the unemployment was rising totally. And the other thing is that the digitalization, which I also mentioned, which had been there before, but it was totally boosting. And that means, on the one hand, that all these precarious jobs, which are actually also created by digitalization, also boosted. But also there is some inequality in the access to internet, which also became even worse because internet was so important. You might even say it was a resource like, yeah, like so many others. It was really necessary in order to participate in life. Yeah. Then we also saw other inequalities being enhanced, like gender inequalities, the reality of migrants. And also, in general, we saw that there's a lack of social protection, which we also saw before, but we noticed that it was even more evident during the pandemic. And yeah, because of the time, I'm not going to continue here, but I'm just inviting you to take a look if you're interested. And yeah, as Stefan also mentioned, we have been also meeting as MIACs, and because of this pandemic and because of this new reality, which actually no, it has not been totally different from the old reality, but still things changed. We actually started again exchanging about the realities of our members, and we came up with the idea to do a collective paper where we would bring together our different experiences and have a common voice. And that is also one document which Stefan also shared on the homepage of the ICA, and which he also has in the link. So maybe afterwards we can share it. It's much shorter than the YCW analysis, only 2 pages. But I think it was also it was also the first time after some years that we did something together as MIACs, like doing an open declaration to the outware. And one key realization we had from all these exchanges, it was that we actually need a total change. It was not, okay, we need just 1 or 2 small changes, but what we need was a total conversion. And that's what we also demand in that declaration. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm taking much more time than foreseen. And we also had this, very interesting technical element. So I'm not sure, Stefan, if you still want me to comment on the missionary dimension, or if I just should stop here.
No, I think it's no problem. Yes, if you'd like to say speak for a few more minutes, that's fine. Yep.
Okay, so about the missionary dimension, I think as you all are aware, and we all are aware, that Cardijn was totally sure that we all have a vocation, and that the vocation would be to realize God's kingdom on earth, which he also explained at one time. No, he said that God's kingdom, that's justice, that's peace, that's love and solidarity. And one of the key experiences that many people tell is that Cardijn asks them at first, he asks them, how are you? What is your life? What is your action? What are you doing? He didn't ask them, how many times do you go to church? And he also said in all his education, we always should start with the life of people. And this is also really in the methodology, no? To start about the life. And then, of course, there should be values. There should be values which are actually the values of love and peace and justice. There should also be Christian values, but there can be totally other values also from different phases, because it's all in the end, it's about the human dignity, which also mattered so much to Cardijn. So the missionary or dimension of YCW, it's not about not talking about faith. It's also not about not talking about values, but still it's not about, okay, we're going to see to which church someone belongs to, or what is the paper of the baptism or something. And I would just like to share that it was actually funny, because you would think that maybe with this really open-minded approach, you would end up not talking about faith at all. But in the end, we had 2 people in my base group in YCW Germany who had been atheist when they started and who got baptized. because of YCW in the process. And I just want to be very clear that that was not our intention. No, never. We had this idea. It just happened. And there was another case of some atheist girl that was later when I was already in the IS, that I had been visiting one base group, and we had been discussing about the Declaration of Principles. And in that moment, when we were discussing about the Christian characteristic, the girl said, yeah, okay, I have always been atheistic, and I also felt like that always. But when I read that and I compare it with my experience in YCW and with my engagement in YCW, I would actually say I'm Christian. So yeah, I don't think that she ever got Baptist, but she was just saying like that. Okay, I'm Christian. And I just think that maybe it's interesting to share this, because Stefan also told me that there's sometimes some irritation, especially among formers, if there's full-timers for YCW working nowadays and they're having different faces and they're not all Christian. But I would actually say that doesn't matter. What does matter is that you do care about faith and that you do care about human dignity, and that you are actually open to help young people to come into action and to realize their own vocation to act. Because that's also the educational approach, no? That we learn that we're actually able to act and that we are supposed to do that. Yeah. And so I think following Cardijn, even as formers, we should rather ask people, how are you? And also, what are you doing, instead of what is your face? Thanks, Stefan.
Thanks very much, Sarah, for sharing that experience from the base level of the German YCW through to the international, including in COVID time and non-COVID time, and also on the missionary dimension of the movement. I think it's a good time now to let others respond or ask questions, make comments. This is your opportunity. I see in the chat, you can put your questions in the chat or comments. I see there's one from Wayne. Given the reform nature of the German Synod on Synodality, how influential has the Cardijn movement been in that process, given the number of young people involved in it? Yeah, that might be a hard question, but anyway, over to you on that one, Sarah. And others may feel free to jump in whenever you wish, or put your hand up in case I can't see you. Just jump in. So did you get that question, Sarah, about the German Synod? What's the YCW involvement been in that, I guess, is what the question means or amounts to?
Yeah, I do think that you refer to the German Synod, which is a little bit different from this international Synod process. Sometimes we had some confusion about that. And I just want to be clear, I'm not talking as a representative of the German YCW. No, this time has passed. So, but yeah, I can share what my view is from the outside, being also very close to them. I don't know if you know that in Germany there is one network of all the Catholic youth movements, and all the Catholic inspired youth movements. So there's actually YCW, but there's also the young Christian students, and there's also the MIAC. There's different movements. There's also movements which maybe are not so closely connected to YCW in other countries, which are the Scouts. Yeah, and there's also one parish movement. So there's also and these movements they form a platform. And the platform is doing the representation of the young people in fields where they have common interests, or they think that they have common interests. So especially when it's about influencing directly inside the structural Catholic Church, usually those who will be approached first by the Catholic Church, it's a so-called BDKJ. Oh, that's this platform, and it's their leaders. So YCW has been influential in influencing them, of course, but they're doing all this, yeah, voicing out for the young people in all the movements.
Okay, well, I see another question there from Pat Branson asking about the role that chaplains played in your formation as a Joseph.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. To be honest, not so much. And I would actually say that this is one, maybe my experience is part of the crisis that this the structure Catholic Church has. No? Actually, when I became active on the regional level in YCW Osnabrück, no, which was my region, we had one chaplain who was elected, but he was also chaplain of MTC, and he was also chaplain of several other things, and he didn't have any time to sacrifice for YCW. So actually, in this, there were after 2 years that I had been regional leader that I saw him the first time. And actually, when yeah, as a regional team, at one moment we decided to just ask him to resign because that had no sense. And what the region did at that moment was looking for another chaplain.
Can you hear me?
And we actually found
Okay.
some
I'm okay.
woman.
How are you?
I think someone doesn't have the mic muted.
Frank walked out of the room.
I've just muted them. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, mine's
you.
just
Thank
walked out of the room anyway.
So what we did, we looked for another chaplain, and we found one lay woman. She was still also working for the church, no? But I don't know how to say that in English. If you're working in the pastoral,
Yeah.
but as lay woman, and she was elected as a adult collaborator, so as you might say, female lay chaplain in YCW Osnabrück, but that was actually the moment that I started to become active on the national level. So I was still part of looking for her, but I was not really influenced by her. Yeah, and on the national, we did have that. You might say difficulty, and I would still say it's a difficulty in YCW Germany that we have some confusion between chaplains and collaborators. It's also financially, because the chaplains, at least on the national, they're still paid by the Catholic Church. So what the movement is doing is that we're looking for people who are like theologians and who can be paid by the church. They do fulfill the criteria, but in the end, they're acting as leaders in the movement. So we didn't have that no, what you would say chaplain, really this person accompanying, really helping in the Rolva, giving some spiritual ideas, etc. But it was a leader also having some theological background. The first time that I really experienced a collaborator in the way that you would actually think it should be, it was in the international team. I was volunteer European coordinator while I was also president of the YCW Germany. And there was the ASPAC chaplain, also from the Philippines. And with his or her reflections and his way of accompanying us as international team, that was really impressive to me. And that was actually the first experience that I really felt, okay, he's actually fulfilling the role as it should be, as it's also written in our fundamental documents. Yeah. And then in the International Secretariat again, we had elected someone, but he was also busy with some vocation in the in his monastery. And then I think there had also been some problems from our side, because we had been sending some letters, but actually they were not sent, which was found out like 2 years later, and it was a little bit a pity. But yeah, long story short, he resigned also. And we had been looking for some other people. I had also been asking some people, but no one really volunteered to be open for that task. So we ended also in the IS without having an international chaplain. Yeah, I'm sorry to answer that question in that way.
Anyway, it's interesting to know that this is an issue around the world for the YCW. I see another question there. Peter Maher asked the question in the chat. Peter, do you want to speak to that question?
Yep. Yes, here I am. I've managed to find the unmute button. Yeah, I just think that we've had a big conference here in Sydney last week, and all the speakers were, it was run by the diocese, and all the speakers were really talking about, you know, of doctrine or what's the other word I've used? Oh, apologetics, that's right. Why is the Catholic Church right about everything, you know? Whereas, Sarah, what you were saying seems to be something quite different, understandably. But I'm wondering, what impact does this new evangelization, which seems to be the title for that, what's it having on the church? But pastoral care in particular seems to be, which is really what Cardijn was on about, you know, caring about the actual person in their place of work and life. That's really the heart of where pastoral care takes place, whereas this other emphasis seems to be misguided. I was just throwing it in for a comment, or maybe a comment from Sarah, if you would be able. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, so first, I think all of you also know, no, it's very clear that the way some people are acting in our beloved church, and also the way that some abuses of power have been happening all over the years, and even these cases of abuses in the last years, it really doesn't help a youth movement somehow connected to Christianity. It really makes all of our work really, really difficult, because when you approach young workers and somehow you're connected to that, the first reaction is understandably distance. So yeah, and I think a part of that has always been the case, but it worsened definitely the last maybe 10 years, I don't know. And actually, it's among young people whom we approach, but it's also inside our own movement. I actually, some weeks ago, I talked to some of these people who have this figure I just explained, no, being theologian, being somehow chaplain, but actually being leader. And he was commenting on some things some people have been saying in, like, some bishop. We have one bishop, one very influential bishop from Cologne, one archbishop, and he's so conservative, and he's really like totally away from nowadays reality, and he's basically saying that these abuses, they don't matter. So things like that, they put into question even the own work of some of our leaders. And that's what he said. I don't know why am I doing my work. So yeah, I think that's also one reality. But Cardijn actually founded us, the movement, also in order to look for, in order to do our part in order to change this church, right? And I think that's also a little bit maybe the answer to a little bit from what I got from your question, Peter. That's, I still hope and I still think that just by being different and just by welcoming everyone, no matter what is the background, I still think that by that we do change a little bit this church.
Actually, could I make a comment of my own here, since this is an issue that I actually stumbled across while I was doing my PhD research. It's very interesting, this concept of new evangelization. Where did it come from? Well, if you trace it, and it wasn't me that traced it, it was an American priest working in Bolivia who told me this. Actually, it comes from the Latin American bishops in Medellin in 1968. And if you look at the Medellin documents from 1968, there's 16 of them. Every one is a See Judge Act. So when they talked about new evangelization in 1968, they meant the Cardijn method. So things have changed since then, but this is another part of our heritage which has been turned away from what it originally meant. Anyway, I just put that in. I'll put a link in the chat if anybody wants to follow this up, because I wrote something about it. But I see there's another question there now too, from Peter Cowan. Peter, do you want to speak to this? Other Peter?
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, I just wanted to ask Sarah, really, of all the projects and campaigns she worked on in her leadership roles, particularly internationally, which ones impacted the greatest on her and the workers that she worked with, the team that she worked with? Which ones did she feel, really impacted and affected her? Does that make sense to it?
Yeah, it's a really tough one.
Mm.
And I think I will need some seconds to think about it. Just before, I would like to comment, because I just read the question from before from Wayne, and I feel like maybe I didn't really understand it totally. And because I must also say, this concept of the new evangelization, just because I use this term of evangelization, I didn't want to promote this concept. No, actually, when I talked about mission or evangelization, I talked about it, in the Cardijn sense, which I think actually is also the sense in the First Testament. Like when Jonah is sent to Nineveh, it's about telling them how to act. It's not about telling them about some gospel or anything. So and some other sense of evangelization, okay, that's up to people what they understand by this term.
Sarah, just to clarify, I agree with what Stefan said, that we would have called it evangelization once, but in Australia, because we've had this impact of this divine renovation program where they've brought back the idea of discipleship, but whereas we were encouraged to be apostles, to use our gifts and go out and serve people, as you spoke of, this new program is stressing discipleship, where it's gone back to prayer and looking inward and not looking outward to the needs of people, and going with, whereas we go with open minds, because as Cardijn said, every new member brings a new agenda. They now walk into meetings and they already have determined what you're supposed to think. And so it's antithetical to everything we stand for, which is probably why in Australia the Cardijn movement isn't liked by the church, because we keep talking about, well, what do the grassroots think? We've just had a plenary here, which was a failure, because again they took the approach that we know, as Peter Marr said, we know all the answers, we know best, and so all the red button issues that we identified in 17,500 submissions were ignored. And whereas the Cardijn people, that was why I asked my first question about the German synod, which has gone exactly the opposite direction about renewing the church, because they did listen to what the grassroots are saying, and going back to the Jesus model, not the Roman model of church. So the word's been hijacked, as Stefan said.
Interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. I'm still thinking about this question of Peter's.
Yeah.
And
Sarah, can I just say, Sarah, you mentioned youth unemployment, migration, ecology, and young women. They were some of the ones that I heard, but there might be something special for you.
Yeah, I mean, that was also, that were aspects in the IPA. And I mean, the thing is that maybe right now I would say, I think the educational approach of YCW really worked. That there were different actions based on my level of awareness in that moment. And now, of course, you can start. You can talk about the campaign about precarious work, which we had on national level, and I think that was great, because I was able to use all that information we had gotten, also on the European level, and from Bridget about the See Judge Act, and that I think that really helped in order to really spread the methodology also inside the movement.
Okay.
But I wouldn't have been there if I wouldn't have been at the regional level.
Okay.
No, and also, I mean, I think really, of course, organizing young Roma people, really going to where they lived, really asking them how they are, etc. It was really long process. It was a long action we had, but that also, again, it wouldn't have been happening without some other experience before. No, and also I wouldn't have been in the IS without this experience before. So it's all a little bit connected. It's not like I can say, okay, this action that mattered, that made the difference.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any more questions from the audience? I'm just going down the bottom here on the messages. There's no more right now that I can see. Anybody else that would like to jump in with a comment or a question? It's not compulsory, and we've been going for 50 minutes. So perhaps,
Sarah?
Oh, there you go. Go. Who is
Sarah, I
that?
was just wondering whether you might talk a little bit about the situation of the refugees in Europe, Germany particular, and the opportunity there is to reach out particularly to those young refugees who have been touched in some way by the YCW. There are refugees, I know, from the Ukraine, but there's also been, over the last decade, a strong influx of refugees from Africa, North Africa as well, Middle East.
Yeah, actually, maybe one thing which might be also interesting is that it was also a little bit connected to to this action of talking with young people belonging to the Roma minority. That we had this national action, and that actually helped us to do extension. There was one new YCW created in Berlin, and that is a diocese which still exists until today. So hoping that there might be some permanence. It was not one going and then leaving again. And that is one of the dioceses which are, like, from their beginning, but also until today, characterized by being a region having many refugees. And there used to or there are still many people from Syria in YCW Berlin, also in the leadership. And yeah, nowadays we have this the situation with the young people from, or with in general with the people from the Ukraine. And I actually been talking with one leader in Berlin, and she's from Syria, about that some weeks ago, and she said something very interesting, because she said, at first, to be very clear, all people suffer. Most of them are coming from war, and it's all horrible situations which the refugees have. And before doing any competition among the refugees, we should all be very clear, okay, we're all suffering horribly. And I found that very wise, also from her part. Nevertheless, it's very clear for all of us that there are differences made, by the government, by politicians, maybe also by people in the society, like people from other continents or also from Syria, etc. They treat their refugees. And being refugee means specific rights and specific status. But for example, it doesn't mean that you're allowed to work. While for the people from the Ukraine, it was very clear that they were granted work permission very soon. And there are language courses provided. Actually, the service to look for jobs in Essen, in my city. They're having all their information provided in German and in Ukrainian. It's not in English, it's not in Arabic, it's not in French, it's not in Spanish, but it's in German and Ukrainian. No, which is, I'm really not saying it's the fault of the Ukrainian people, and it's still, their fate is horrible. This war is horrible, everything is horrible. But I think what many people in YCW hope is that the politicians are going to learn, and that our society is going to learn, that the way we are welcoming people from Ukraine now, we should actually be welcoming all people.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm Trish Blanks, I'm from Bendigo, and I've had a fair bit of interaction with the Syrian community that came over from Syria to Bendigo, and they're settled in Australia beautifully, and they've been able to take up their original occupations. It wasn't easy because we demand often that they have to, like for a doctor, has to sit exams for his doctorate, and it's not easy doing that in another language because he spoke Syrian naturally and not Australian. So that these people have managed to re-assimilate into Australian culture, and I'm really proud of them. And we've worked with them very gently, but very thoroughly. So yeah, I'm proud of the way Australia's assimilated other people from other cultures. Are they all Orthodox Christians, or are they a multiple of different denominations and different religions? They're in Germany.
In YCW Germany, it's totally composed of different denominations and religions.
Yeah, beautiful. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, I was in Germany 2016 when I was doing my research for my PhD, and I was at an event, and I met this young Syrian guy, Muslim guy. He was there at the YCW activity, and he was just so pleased at the welcome that the German YCW had given him. So it was really kind of very striking and moving, I would say, also, just, you know, the way he was welcomed there. So a credit to the German YCW, and at least in that one instance. Yeah, but I'm sure there was many more as well. Yeah, so are there any final questions before we've just going about to hit the hour now? So if you do have any other comments or questions, now's the time to chime in. Otherwise, I'm going to move to moving a motion of thanks to Sarah for spending this hour with us and sharing her experience of the movement, not only in Germany, but around the world, and also those questions of the YCW reaching out to refugees and to people of different faiths. So really, thanks very much for joining us, Sarah. It's fantastic. Yeah, hope we can continue this dialogue, maybe in other ways, in other webinars. Now that you're a former YCW, you're like us, you've got the rest of your life to be a former YCW. So you're one of us now. We look forward to being in further contact with you. Thanks very much.